Okay, we will go on to number 8. It's an information item about the CARES Act survey report by Dr. Jill Curry. Dr. Curry?
Hi. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, Jill Curry, program analyst. I'm on the policy team here at USBE, and let me share my screen so I can pull up the slides. Okay.
We've just gotten to the point in our lives we just have to have our PowerPoints, don't we?
We do.
I think you're a co-host now, so you can do that.
Okay. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Hold on 1 second. Let me just get my notes. Okay. Okay, so as Sarah already very nicely introduced, today I'm going to be presenting the CARES Act survey report. Okay. Sorry. So as brief background, we administered the CARES survey to LEAs this winter. It closed on January 8th. The survey was initiated in compliance with reporting requirements from the U.S. Department of Education for ESSER and GEAR funding. In addition to those requirements, LEAs were asked questions developed in conjunction with the Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst and questions developed in collaboration with the State Board. The report today will focus on the questions developed by the board. The questions of particular interest to the legislature were presented to the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee on January 22nd. And you can find that presentation in Appendix B of the slide deck. So let's get started. So the first question is, how are LEAs meeting the requirements to provide instructional services for a full academic year? As you can see in the pie chart, 13% will do so through in-person or in-school instruction, 23% will do so via a learner-validated program, and 63% will do so through a 990-hour waiver. So next, we're going to talk about education delivery models. First, we're going to run through the questions for elementary students, and then you're going to see the same set of questions except for secondary students. For this survey, elementary students are defined as students in grades pre-kindergarten through grade 6. The first question for elementary students asks, what percentage of the LEA elementary student population has been remote only since the beginning of the school year? Sorry, my notes. A total of 133 LEAs responded to this question. The median response was 12%, so that middle response of all the responses from LEAs was that 12% of the LEA's elementary student population has been remote only since the beginning of the school year. The modal response, in other words, the response that appeared the most often from LEAs or was given the most often from LEAs, was 5%. We had 8 LEAs reporting 100%. However, 123 of our LEAs, or 92% of our LEA respondents, reported that less than 50% of their elementary student population has been remote only since the beginning of the school year. So from these statistics, what we can really see is that education delivery is skewed toward in-person learning and away from remote only learning. Thus, the majority of elementary students are not in a remote-only learning situation. And if you would like to see an additional breakdown of the responses to this question, if you go to Appendix A, you can find that. The next question we have is similar. It asks, from the start of the school year through December 1st, 2020, what is the average percentage of days elementary students have spent in online and in-person learning? So like the previous question, again, we see that our elementary students are in-person learning at much greater rates compared to online learning. The modal or most frequent response for online learning is 0%. 41 of our LEAs, or 31%, report that 0% of days elementary students have been engaged in online learning. The modal response for in-person learning is 100%. The median response, so again, that middle response for online learning is 15%, and the median response for in-person learning is 85%. Only 29 of our LEAs, or 22%, report 50% or more days students are engaged in online learning. 109 LEAs, or 82%, report 50% or more days students are engaged in in-person learning. So again, these statistics further highlight that the delivery of education for elementary students has largely been in person versus remote learning. Any questions so far? Okay. So still focused on elementary students, the next question asked, which intervention strategies LEAs were engaged in to address unfinished learning? You can see the responses in this bar chart. Almost all of the LEAs were focusing on essential standards from grade level core, providing support for social, emotional, and behavioral needs, using assessment to diagnose unfinished learning, and focusing on depth of instruction by adjusting pace. For these categories, 92 to 95% of LEAs reported using these strategies. Over a majority of our LEAs, or 62%, are providing expanded learning time, and less than a quarter of our LEAs are establishing community schools and wraparound supports or provided in other response. So to give you a sense of some of the other responses provided by LEAs, I've broken them into several broad categories, which you see here. So we have family, school meals, summer, personalized instruction, and other. The responses here include a range of activities from home visits, summer bridge programs, one-on-one time with teachers once a week, to release time during electives to finish classwork and homework. Should we pause? It looks like there's some questions. I'm happy to pause before we kind of jump into secondary students.
Okay, Board Member Cannon?
Had to find my mute button. Thanks for calling on me. Jill, going back to your first slide, you said 13% in-person in-school instruction, 63% are using a waiver, and then 23% have learner-validated programs. I don't know what you mean by learner-validated program.
Yes, that is a great question. So a learner-validated program is a program within an LEA where the student receives instruction through an online learning program, a blended learning program, or a competency-based learning program. And this definition is included in our pupil accounting rule, R277419. I had the same question that you did, so I had to do some digging.
Okay, and then on the 63%, does it mean they've waived? Well, I know we waived 180 days. Have they also gotten waiver from the 990 hours? Is that what that means?
Yes, yeah. So those, yeah, that's my understanding is that those LEAs have received a waiver for the 990-hour requirement for the 2021 school year.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Board Member Cannon. Board Member Lear?
Thanks. I think you may have mentioned this, Jill, but I may have not heard it. But how many, you said there were 156 total responses. What percentage of that is that of LEAs?
My understanding is that, and Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that that would be all of our LEAs that have received ESSER or GEAR funds, because they're required, they were required to fill this out to fulfill the federal reporting requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah was nodding that that's accurate. So thank you, Dr. Curry. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, I had a question about community schools. Sorry, I don't know if you answered that or not. What is the difference between a community school and is there some unique? Anyways, I'm just trying to understand that when it was presented. Yeah, they establish community schools and wraparound supports. I understand wraparound supports, but community schools after school programs, is that what that's referring to?
That is a great question, and I'm gonna have to phone a friend on that one, because aside from it being an option for the survey question, I personally don't have any further details, but I'm guessing someone else in the meeting would.
Yeah, I can
Dr.
answer
Curry's
that.
looking for some help. Is that you, Dr. Dixon?
I am happy to help. Community
Thank you.
schools, it's a very specific model that you might, for example, find a clinic in the school. It's very much a family-oriented model, community model, where you'll find services instead of families having to go out into community. They're right there as part of the school. You'll see a community school or two in Salt Lake District. There are a couple in Davis District. So the end size of these schools are small. They, instead of having connections to wraparound services, they come right there to the school. So it's a model that has great results, and we'd be happy to take anybody on a visit to a community school. They're wonderful models.
Okay, so these are social services coming into schools and providing those within the school setting for families to come to the school for that, for those resources. Am I understanding that? So the Promise schools kind of would be an example of that?
Not necessarily, they may or may not be. Community schools sort of captures a situation where the services are right at the school. So it could be a health clinic. It could be it could include a food pantry. It could include social services. Could include a number of things. But the idea is that family can access the resources they need right there at the school with their students.
So can I ask, is that okay if I keep asking questions? So it may include many or just one? Is there a certain model that it has to include to fit into that? Or is it just, because a lot of schools do have food pantries there. Would that be considered a community school, or does it have to be more extensive than that?
It's more comprehensive than that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Great question.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. So Dr. Curry, I do have one question. When you were talking, I think it might have been in your second slide almost, when you were talking about fully 12% were online elementary and virtual programs. So I'm asking, were those fully online schools, for example, Mountain Heights Academy, or maybe Utah Virtual would be a little better, and virtual programs inside of districts?
So is this the slide that you're referring to?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so it's hard because we're asking LEAs to report kind of on averages, so it's hard to sum them up. But essentially, all the 12% means is that if we look at the full range of responses that our LEAs provided, kind of that middle response is 12%. So right in the middle, our LEAs are reporting that 12% of their elementary student population has been remote only. So it's not saying anything about our total elementary student population. We just don't have that data from the survey to say that. Just that if we look across all of the responses, that middle response that we see is 12%. And what I can gather from that is that if we had a higher rate of elementary students remote only, that middle response would be much higher. So it would be, 50% or 60% or 70%. Does that help clarify?
It does. I think we only have 2 fully online charter schools that this maybe would hit under. So, okay. Thank you, Dr. Curry.
And then can I add another point of clarification?
Yes.
As well. Okay. So I think the other thing when I was going through and analyzing the data that I thought of is that for probably many of our LEAs, this percentage is also going to include those families within. So the LEA may be largely offering in-person in-school instruction, but this percentage is going to include those families who have personally opted to keep their child in a remote learning situation, but in the LEA. So that's the other way I've been thinking about it as well. So hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Curry, do you want to continue?
Yes. So let me get back to, okay. So next, we're essentially going to run through the exact same set of questions, except this time it's going to be for secondary students. For the purpose of this survey, secondary students are defined as students in grade 7 through grade 12. So again, for our first question for secondary students, what percentage of the LEA's secondary student population has been remote only since the beginning of the school year? Similar to the elementary student population, we see the median response here is 12% and the modal response is 5%. Compared to the elementary student population, we have a couple more LEAs, 10 instead of 8, who report 100% of their secondary student population has been remote only since the beginning of the school year. We find that 109 LEAs, or 89% of our LEA respondents, report that less than 50% of their secondary student population has been remote only since the beginning of the school year. This percentage is slightly less than the elementary student population. Again, however, from these statistics, we still see that for secondary students, education delivery is skewed toward in-person learning and away from remote-only learning. The next question asks, from the start of the school year through December 1st, 2020, what is the average percentage of days secondary students have spent in online and in-person learning? The modal or most frequent response for online learning is 0%. 32 of our LEAs, or about a quarter, report 0% of days secondary students have been engaged in online learning. The modal response for in-person learning is 100%. The median response for online learning is 20%, and our median response for in-person learning is 80%. Only 42 of our LEAs, or 31% of our LEA respondents, report 50% or more days students have been engaged in online learning. 102 LEAs, or about 3/4, report 50% or more days students are engaged in in-person learning. So kind of unsurprisingly, based on what we've been seeing, we have a slightly higher percentage of secondary students engaged in online learning compared to elementary students. Overall, though, the delivery of education to secondary students is largely in person rather than online. And just like for the elementary student breakdown, if you go to Appendix A of the slide deck, you can see some additional breakdowns for these questions. Okay, so let's look at the intervention strategies LEAs reported to address unfinished learning for secondary students. Again, we see almost all LEAs utilizing providing support for social, emotional, and behavioral needs essential standards from grade level core, focusing on depth of instruction by adjusting pace, and using assessment to diagnose unfinished learning. For these categories, 90 to 98% of LEAs reported using these strategies. Over 2/3 of our LEAs, or 70%, are providing expanded learning time. 27% are establishing community schools and wraparound supports, and 15% provided in other response. And then diving into the other responses, the categories here are the same as they were for elementary students, except school meals has been replaced by in-school. Again, we see a variety of strategies being used with additional in-school efforts for our secondary students, such as additional sections of targeted classes or schedule adjustments to provide a double dose of math. Okay, next, we're going to move on to talking about trends in teacher retirement and resignation. For retirement and resignation, we're focused on 2 periods of time. The first is September 2018 to September 2019, and the second is September 2019 to September 2020. So first, we'll look at teacher retirement, which you can see on this slide. LEAs were asked to report the number of teachers who retired during each time period. On the slide, you can see some of the descriptive statistics of those reported numbers. The median is 0 and the mode is 0, meaning the most frequent response from LEAs was 0 retirements for both time periods. The mean for 2018 to 2019 is 6 teachers retiring, and the mean for 2019 to 2020 is 7. So we do see some increase from 2018 to 2019 to 2019, 2020. So let's see how things look for teacher resignation.
Dr.
Again,
Curry, Dr. Curry, before you leave that slide, we have a question by Board Member Earl.
Yeah, so let me understand this, that we have certain areas that are retiring at higher rates. Is that because if our median and mode are at 0, so there's certain either maybe large districts, is that what's impacting this, or what are there certain areas that are being impacted disproportionately? I guess that's what I'm asking because of the numbers.
Yes, that is a great question. And like here, all I'm presenting are those descriptives. I'm certainly happy to kind of dive into the numbers to see if there's any relationship between area and trends in teacher retirement or school type, like if we're seeing this at school districts versus charters or larger LEAs versus smaller LEAs, but that is not analyses that I've conducted at this point, but I'm happy to.
I can follow up with you on that. I'm just curious, so thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Dr. Curry?
Okay. So for teacher resignation, again, the median and mode are the same for both periods of time. The median is 3 teachers resigning and the mode is 0. Interestingly, for teacher resignation, we actually see a decrease in the average number of teachers resigning from 16 in 2018-2019 to 15 in 2019-2020. So our next question is about LEA partnership with the local health department.
Dr. Curry, we have a question back on that other slide. I'm sorry.
Yes. No.
Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. So we're talking here about this federal CARES Act funding and teacher retirement or resignation. And it brings to my mind a question that I'm wondering if as a state, we might be doing anything in terms of tracking numbers of educators who have been afflicted with COVID, and if they are teaching remotely or if they are teaching in person. Those are numbers that I would love to know, because I have a concern about our teachers and have we put them at risk, and what are the consequences to the teachers of having the face-to-face learning that this survey shows that so many of our schools have been using. Do you know of anywhere that we're tracking that or that we might know? A few months ago, I read in the paper there were close to 500 teachers that had come down with COVID, but that's old information, and I wonder if that's something we're keeping track of.
That's a great question. And someone else in this meeting is likely more informed than I am. I know that on the state dashboard, there was a place where you could pull information from schools. I can't remember though if teachers were separated from other school staff in the counts. And then the other piece that I'm not sure is there is the school or LEA model. So whether the teacher has COVID but is teaching remotely or is teaching in person, that I'm not sure.
Board Member Cannon, this might be something to follow up maybe with either Dr. Dixon or someone on staff, because I think most of this information is held by the local health departments and by the each local school district or school.
Thank you. I would love to do that. I think it's something that, should we face another pandemic in the future, it would be
Janet,
a to look
really?
back on.
Did you say that out loud?
I should learn.
Okay, I just also want to remind everyone, we do have a 12:30 time certain and so if we could let Dr. Curry finish through, and if you'll write your questions down, not that we don't want to have all your questions, but if you could write them down, that would be helpful. Thank you, Dr. Curry.
Thank you. Okay, so next we're looking at LEA partnership with the local health department and the extent to which the LEA coordinated with the local health department. So the response options here are no cooperation, some cooperation, and full cooperation. And we see the highest level of full cooperation on containing potential outbreaks at 85%. We find a majority of LEAs coordinating with local health departments on developing the school reopening plan. You can see that at 60%, and implementing the school reopening plan at 58%. In general, for each category, not many LEAs report no cooperation. The largest response for no cooperation is in regard to implementing the school reopening plan, with 21 LEAs reporting no cooperation. So now we're going to jump back to staffing, although this time we are talking about non-teaching employees. LEAs were asked whether they have had to furlough or lay off staff related to impacts of COVID-19. The vast majority of LEAs, 90%, reported no. And then there was interest in who at the LEA was serving as the primary point of contact with the local health department. For 56% of our LEAs, it is the superintendent or executive director. The next most frequent response is principal or administrative staff at 13 and 10% respectively. And then from there, a variety of other roles serve as the primary point of contact, from assistant superintendent to school nurse or teacher. Okay, the last two questions we'll talk about deal with successful strategies and best practices. They're both open-ended questions. The first is, what best practices has the LEA developed to respond to COVID-19 in their schools? The LEA response is largely centered on 4 major challenges or opportunities. Those are which you can see on the slide, those are the need to provide instruction in multiple modalities, mitigating the risk of transmission, addressing learning losses resulting from disruptions, and increased stress and uncertainty for students. And then they provide some of their best practices in response to these challenges. So first, needing to provide instruction in multiple modalities. Some of the best practices are recording or live streaming classes, increased engagement with families and parents, and additional professional learning on digital learning. To mitigate the risk of transmission, LEAs enhance their communication and coordination modified school schedules to stagger students, and followed required and recommended protocols. In addressing learning losses, LEAs reported small group instruction and intervention, use of diagnostic assessments, after school and summer programs. And then to address increased stress and uncertainty for students, LEAs engaged in more social and emotional learning, hired additional mental health professionals, and continued routines as much as possible. So the second open-ended question asked LEAs, what successful strategies developed in response to COVID-19 do they think they will continue post-COVID-19? Four adaptations or innovations were identified here. Anytime, anywhere learning, increased family communication and engagement, allocating time in different ways, and enhanced sanitation. So anytime, anywhere learning really focused on expanded use of technology from live streaming or recording lessons, which is useful for review of content or for students who are absent from class, to competency-based measurements. Increased parent and family communication and engagement typically included more frequent communications. So sometimes that was weekly emails, just more constant contact with families and parents, and also virtual parent meetings for things like parent-teacher conferences, and also IEP meetings. Next, we have allocating time in different ways or thinking differently about time. These innovations include maintaining staggered schedules and doing something different once a week. So it could be interventions for students or professional learning for educators. And then last but not least, we have enhanced sanitation. So here we see LEAs wanting to maintain better air filtration, cleaning schedules, encouraging good hygiene and hand washing. And with that, I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Yes, Board Member Lear.
Hi, I just actually have a short comment, and that is that I think this presentation and this information is a perfect example of one of the times that LEAs are being asked many, many questions. It was probably a pain in the rear end for someone at an LEA to fill out this information, but it was clearly required by the feds, by the LFA, and then our office participated. So I think it's helpful to point out that there are, this is an example of the kind of thing we may be talking about later in legislation that I would love to simplify or be for LEAs or take that burden from them. But I think this is something that didn't come because of our demand, but rather others' demand. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Dr. Curry, I don't see any other questions at this time. So I am going to turn the helm back over to Chair Huntsman at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Curry.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Vice Chair Belknap, for taking care of some business while I had to step away, taking care of business.